Hey there, hello. You have found Fox's First and North, and you're saying to yourself, well, it doesn't usually look that way. We were right, because it's a little bit different edition. Tim Van Voren, Brandon Cruz, it's a special Wisconsin edition. We'll focus on some of the local teams, and we'll do it without Lily Zhao. Unfortunately, this time around, she has the coverage duties somewhere else. That's what happens during the sports week, particularly this time of year, Brandon. There's a lot going on. So we'll miss Lily, but we'll have no shortage of topics to take in.
No, this is that fun time of year because baseball is just getting started. Basketball has ended and now starting the postseason. And then we're looking at NFL football because guys are already starting to work out, and we look towards the draft. I mean, this is a time when there's a season of change, but there's so much excitement behind all that change.
We've had a little bit of, at least some hints of nice weather outside. The sun shines, and you can't help but think ahead. And we're going to do that to think ahead to baseball, to think ahead to the draft. We're going to start with the Milwaukee Bucks because, as you said, the basketball season is winding down, and this is when it matters. This is when it matters most for any team in the NBA, but really for the Milwaukee Bucks, who have mortgaged so much in the offseason for what happens in the postseason. As we approach the postseason, Brandon, I think back a few years, there was such energy in town, and the Bucks were just rolling, and everything seemed like it was falling together. Even the championship year, of course, it was later in the calendar year, but this time of year, you felt a lot going in the right direction for the Bucks. 2024, and you sense what feeling toward the Bucks?
I sense stress. I feel like this team seems so stressed out at this point. I don't think that they've been comfortable ever since they got rid of Adrian Griffin. I'm not putting this on Doc Rivers or anything, but they just haven't been able to figure things out on the court, and I'm wondering if that translates off the court as well, because they just can't seem to click and be consistent. You were talking about the lead up of the championship years, and since then, there's always been this sense of excitement. This time around, I feel like it's almost a burden. I feel like they don't have that fun. They don't seem like they're having as much fun out there. And I don't know if that's just from a distance when we're covering a game or talking to these guys, but it definitely has that feel that this is work and it's been a challenge more than it's been fun and easy. And I think that adds to the stress as they go into the postseason.
Well, you talk about stress. I think you make a lot of good points there. Stress on the training staff and the medical people as well, because you have a key injury to deal with, and that's Giannis Antetokounmpo. He went down in the fourth last regular season game, didn't play in the final three. Doesn't seem like he's going to play at the start of this playoff series against the Indiana Pacers. And say what you want about anybody else on the roster, he's the best player. He's one of the best players in the world, and he's at less than 100%. So automatically, you're going into a postseason run that you hope is going to be a deep run, and maybe requiring a deep run to get him at his best, but you have this roadblock right up front.
And that is the problem here. I mean, you have Damian Lillard now who has to shoulder all of this. Say what you will about Chris Middleton or Bobby Portis or Brooke Lopez or any of the other supporting characters. Without Giannis Antetokounmpo, this team has to climb uphill. And no matter what Damian Lillard has done in his past, where he's led Portland teams into the playoffs in one series, basically being the only star, I don't know if this team can do that, especially against the Pacers with just Damian Lillard. And on top of that, he's not 100%. He has an abductor strain. He's been able to play through it. But the one thing that we've seen with this team is that it hasn't taken over yet. He hasn't been able to put his magic into this team to make a run or to get some big wins. He's had some big shots. He's had some big games. He's played a huge role, but he hasn't taken that next step that I think a lot of people were expecting to see him do. So what do you think, though, with what he has to do without Giannis on the court with him?
Well, I think the expectations are outsized for Damian Lillard, number one, because, again, what did the Bucks say when they got him? Well, essentially they said, this is the missing piece, right? We've traded away Drew Holiday. My goodness, you traded away a critical player on your team offensively and defensively because you have the chance to get Damian Lillard, and he's going to play with Giannis Antetokounmpo. To go to Giannis Antetokounmpo, when the Bucks won their championship, he was superhuman. He was hurt in that postseason run, and the Bucks wondered if he would be able to come back. He did, and then he carried them in the finals, of course, over the Phoenix Suns. So my expectations, I think, are maybe a little more tempered because what is realistic from Giannis coming off injury? What is realistic from Damian Lillard coming off this season where he was not consistent? As you said, he has health issues of his own. He's had certain things to deal with off the court, in addition to just the transition of being traded from his only professional team right before training camp, which wasn't necessarily his preferred destination, as opposed to, say, Miami. So he ends up in Milwaukee, everything's thrown together, and it has been an effort all season long. It has looked like an effort all season long under Adrian Griffin or interim coach Joe Prunty or Doc Rivers. And I think the pressure is amped up on everybody organizationally because there's really only one goal that's going to matter or be acceptable to this team going into it. So I think my expectations for Lillard, my expectations for Giannis, my expectations for Portis and Middleton and Connaughton and Lopez and whoever you want to say are probably somewhere like here. And for the Bucks to win the championship, they probably need to perform somewhere like here.
Yeah. Well, and you just mentioned it right at the beginning there. They gave away or traded away Drew Holiday to bring in Damian Lillard. Drew Holiday's on the best team in basketball right now with the Celtics. He gets rewarded with a huge contract to stay there because he's made such an impact. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier, where this team doesn't look like it's having fun. Drew Holiday made things fun for this team, and he might have been the glue of that championship team. When you look at, it's Giannis, it's Chris Middleton doing this or whatever, but it was really what Drew Holiday did, and I think how he facilitated this team both on and off the court. I think they are missing that more than they realized they would by getting rid of him. And so to me, that is the big difference of not having Drew this time around.
I think that's a terrific point. And I think in this series against Indiana, you're going to miss his personality. You're going to miss his defensive abilities as well and his defensive versatility, because there were times when, well, we'll try Holiday on this guy. We'll try Holiday on this guy. Or Holiday's over here, so we'll try Giannis on this guy. The Indiana Pacers can score. They scored against the Bucks. They scored against just about everybody. They scored a lot of points at the end of the regular season. It's tough to stop them defensively, and the Bucks have limited defensive options in my mind.
Do you think then, in this case, because of that, because of the fact that they have not been able to slow down the Pacers during the regular season in transition, let alone throughout games, consistently making stops on defense, do you think that they might start using the emotions that have come through this series as well to their advantage? Maybe trying to rattle a Tyrese Halliburton and to maybe make him make stupid mistakes, because that might be one of their only ways to steal a game here or there.
Well, I do think you bring up a definite possibility. And let's be honest, the Bucks have much more playoff experience. They have veterans that have been through this before, so they may try some of those tricks. And Doc Rivers certainly has been through the NBA wars. You can say what you will about his postseason record, but he's been in all kinds of situations. So I think the Bucks have that on their side. And if you remember, Malik Beasley talked about during the regular season when these teams met, it's going to be uncomfortable for the Pacers if we meet them again. Now the Bucks have to meet them again.
I think that's where the interesting part of this series comes in, because you have the Bucks starting at a man down, the biggest man they have on their team in terms of importance, and yet they have all these people like us kind of questioning where they're at right now and what's going on with this team. I think they can use that as fuel, but can that translate to action on the court and wins, getting the 4 wins to move on?
You're right. 4 wins in this series, and then you need 4 in the next series, and then you need 4 in the next series. It is a grind this time of year in the NBA. We've seen the Bucks at times this season lose the conditioning battle, as far as I see it. I mean, some of these players are older, and some, they've missed a lot of practice time or conditioning time because of injuries. That shows up sometimes. What about Tyrese Halliburton? You mentioned him. He's the Pacers' main man, led the league in assists this season. He's an all-star player. He's from the state of Wisconsin. When he was in high school, he had that funny little shot out here, and you just weren't sure what kind of upside he would end up having. He's had a tremendous upside, and he's one of the best players in the NBA. He's young, he's fresh, and he seems edgy. Could this be a kind of a breakthrough opportunity for Halliburton?
I think so, and I think it's perfect for him in the script to go against the Milwaukee Bucks, being from Wisconsin. And also, he was a big catalyst into the fighting or the word exchange on the court throughout the 5 games that they played in the regular season. So to me, this is his opportunity to shine. And since they last played, they've added Pascal Siakam, who's really making a big difference on that team, and I think creates more opportunity for him to really shine. So to me, that's the other aspect of this that we didn't see in the regular season, what Siakam can bring to this Pacers team, especially in this series and especially in playoff basketball where the flow of the game is so choppy because of the way the timeouts work and the commercial breaks, etc. It's not a free-flowing game in the NBA playoffs.
And the Bucks have seen Siakam in the postseason before. They know what he's all about. He's a terrific complement on that Pacers roster. And let's be fair, we talk about Damian Lillard having to adjust to coming to the Bucks right before training camp. Siakam was a midseason acquisition, and you can integrate these players into your offense and defense on the fly in the NBA. So the Bucks and Pacers first round NBA playoff series, we're watching that one. All right, basketball coming to a close, baseball getting going. The Milwaukee Brewers went into spring training with a wealth of questions. They came out of spring training with some confidence and some new faces, but I don't know exactly how much of an expectation was placed on them to do well. And in the early part of the season, Brandon, they have done quite well.
They have. I mean, they start off on fire with a huge sweep of the Mets on the road. That wasn't expected. And I think when you start off that way, all of a sudden some confidence really kicks in right away. And then they go on and win a couple of more games. They come home and split. But the thing that I've enjoyed watching this team very early as we talk, I mean, this team hasn't even played 20 games as we're talking right now. But the thing that I'm seeing is that it's a different guy each time. And it's through their lineup top to bottom. And it depends on wherever anybody is, they seem to be stepping up. Jackson Chourio as a leadoff hitter has had some success. But then you also look at Bryce Terang down at the bottom of the order. He's having success with key hits. And then defensively, everybody seems to be making some great plays and key moments to keep this team in a game or not allow another team to have big innings. Now, of course, they have allowed big innings here or there. But overall, everything that they're doing seems to be right. And you talked about not having expectations really outside of their clubhouse coming out of spring training. It was Joe Ross talking about this during a rain delay in Cincinnati, and he was talking about the fact that they use it as a chip on their shoulder, that nobody was looking at them as a real contender. And in that room, they use that as fuel to try to move forward and to prove everybody wrong. And so far, very early in this season, they've been doing that, and I think it's a Pat Murphy type of attitude that we're seeing translate through his players.
I'll take that in two directions. Murphy coming up in a moment. First, the players, though, and you say the team is using it as they have something to prove. I think that so many of these individual players have the opportunity to say, we have something to prove, or coming back from injury, or they weren't able to catch contracts somewhere else, or they really haven't had major league success yet. Maybe it's because of lack of opportunity. Maybe it's because of where they were. So individually, baseball is a team sport, but they're individual contractors within a team. And I think so many of these players have individual motivation in Milwaukee in particular. They can have contract advancement as they go forward. They can have just more status advancement as they go forward, more playing time, whatever it might be, that the carrot is dangling for so many guys. And I think you see them playing that way.
You do. And you also see that a lot of these guys have played together in the Brewers system. I mean, especially the outfield core. I mean, they're rooting for one another. They've played with each other. They know each other. So as we talked about a little while ago with the Bucks not having fun, maybe not being as tight knit, it feels like this Brewers team is tight knit and does care for each other and does have fun out there. And you see it. You saw it last year with the team, and especially a big change in Christian Yelich. It's continued this year with Christian Yelich being the guy that everybody kind of looks to, maybe emulates or finds out, okay, how does this guy, a former MVP, go about his business? I'm going to try to do that. And they all seem to follow that lead and enjoy the moment, enjoy what they're doing, believe in one another. And I think because of all those things that they see in front of them with the possibilities that you mentioned, that it adds to this group as a core where individually I'm trying to do this, but collectively it means so much more.
Christian Yelich, when healthy, has been a very productive player so far this season, really in his career. He's an unflappable type of player, too. If you're going to extract something from Christian Yelich, if you're watching him, that's one thing. I think he doesn't really panic. He doesn't show outward signs of exasperation. You might get into a situation with this Brewers team where, the pitching hits a dry spot and they go into a slump and all these young guys are looking around at each other and it's tough to pull out. I mean, that could definitely happen this season. But Pat Murphy seems well equipped as the manager to handle that with all of his college experience. And when I watch him and when I listen to him, he's almost eternally upbeat, but pretty candid at the same time.
He is. And what I think you mentioned it right there. He worked with young players for so long, be it at Notre Dame or Arizona State. And now with this Brewers team, and he's been here for quite a long time, that college experience is another lifetime ago. But
Right.
he's used to working with young people. And I think because he can connect with young players and understand them, they feel a lot more confidence because they believe that he believes in them.
Mm-hmm.
When they see that and feel that, it makes it so much easier to go out there and do their job, I think. I feel that when you believe that your manager has your back and believes in your abilities and puts you in a position to succeed, you're going to play that much better. And I think that's kind of what Pat Murphy has brought to this team. Not saying that Craig Counsell didn't, but for sure, Pat Murphy has that experience working with young people that maybe Craig Counsell didn't, because Craig Counsell came up as a player, played a great career in the big leagues, and then went from the front office to the bench as a manager. Yes, he worked with young guys. They believed him. They liked him, it seemed. But I think there's this little difference with Pat Murphy in the way he is able to connect with them. I know that you've been out there with them this year already. What have you seen in the time, with Pat Murphy interacting with his players?
We've seen, whether on the road or at home after a tough loss, he points out why they lost. He's not really throwing platitudes out there, but he's saying, I was happy with this, that we did well, or we could have done this a little bit better. Again, I go back to what I mentioned earlier about his candor. I think that's appreciated. I assume in the clubhouse, I think fans are kind of saying, oh, well, we can kind of get behind this guy doing that. And he just seems like he's going to have the players behind. He's going to have their back. But he's not going to try to blow smoke at anybody either. I think he's been around baseball for a long, long time. He knows this is a good opportunity for him. And he knows that I think that there's some talent on this team. And he knows that there's some talent in the pipeline. So you don't have to stay with a certain pitcher who doesn't have it, or a guy in a position if he's not getting it done, because Matt Arnold has shown a willingness as the general manager to try new faces. And so far this season, if somebody else isn't doing it and a new player comes along, gets a little more opportunity and seizes it, Murphy rewards that.
He does. And the other thing that you just talked about there too, the fluidity of this roster that Matt Arnold's been willing to do. A lot of teams don't have that depth and don't have all those options to move guys in and out. How big of a role do you think that Matt Arnold is playing in where this team is and is trying to go in this season?
I think very large, and I would say his impact goes back, obviously, before Pat Murphy was managing, while he was the general manager here in taking over for David Stearns. I still do not have any understanding whatsoever how you could trade Esteury Ruiz and get William Contreras in the deal, and more players around the whole deal. But that is like one of the biggest fleecings. I just don't understand how you could make that move. So that alone is kind of his Brett Favre trade, or his trade up for Aaron Rodgers. I mean, I really think you can hang it on that. But I do think Arnold's view of this has been pretty good. A Blake Perkins. I remember when they signed him, and he didn't. You talked about the Brewer outfield. It didn't look like they needed another young outfielder. It was the last thing they needed, and then all of a sudden Blake Perkins becomes a contributor as he gets his opportunity. So I think Matt Arnold does have a handle in all this. And I think you talked about roster versatility. We both kind of talked about it. You use that phrase, though. I think it's a good one, because some of these clubs around the majors, they're committed to a big contract player at a certain position. Even if he's struggling, you really can't take him out. In Milwaukee, almost every position is up for who's playing best. It's kind of merit-based.
It is. The only one I think is Contreras, that he's going to be playing catcher 6 of the 7 days.
He merits it, though.
Yes, he does, and he should be. And it's one of those that even if you're going to give him a rest at catcher, he could probably DH that day and still
Right.
get his swings in, and he's probably lobbying to do that. The other thing that I've noticed is their starting staff. No real big names. Freddie Peralta is an ace. He's proven that he can be that guy. But besides that, Wade Miley is a veteran who's done well, but he's getting up there. How have they been able to stitch this together, losing the Corbin Birds, losing Brandon Woodruff to injury right now, also getting rid of guys that have been key starters at the 4 and 5 spots, and now they're all gone. I mean, it's only Freddie Peralta and Wade Miley back.
Imagine how Adrian Hauser would look on this roster, for
Right.
instance. You know what I mean? So you're exactly right. You bring up a good point. And if you're throwing a wet blanket at things, I think this is it. Because can they continue to get through with this pitching staff and the innings that they're going to need to cover? They've seen injuries in their bullpen, even middle relievers, or Trevor McGill with a concussion. Guys who you could count on, who aren't necessarily the headliners, but you're getting through with them. Freddie Peralta's a headliner. Really, after that, at this stage of their career, and Devin Williams, I don't really know, and Williams is hurt, of course, but I don't really know who else would fall into that category. So you're trying to piece this all together, and you've talked about it's so early in the season. That's where the larger sample size is what we have to monitor.
Yeah, and that's also where the Matt Arnold comes in and the decision making if this team gets into trouble with their back end of the bullpen or starters right now. And that's the part that's going to be interesting come late May, June, as we get closer to the All-Star break, when Devin Williams should probably make his return to the Brewers. And lastly, with the Brewers right now, is the thing that we hadn't seen in baseball in such a long time was small ball. Because it went to just 3-run homers and
strikeouts.
Yes, that was all it was. But because the addition of the pitch clock, because of the addition of the rules of throwing over to first base or any base for that matter,
The larger bases.
yes, you're right. It has created offense in a way that brings us back to a different era of baseball. And to me, it makes the game so much more exciting because whenever you see one of these Brewers get on base, my thought is, how many pitches until he runs?
Well, and that's the thing. This roster is very well suited to this brand of baseball now. You have young players, some of whom have speed. They're not going to necessarily hit the 3-run homer, but they can get on and create some havoc on the base paths, and then you can manage accordingly, and your pitching staff has to adjust accordingly to whatever the other team is doing against you. So I agree with you. It's a watchable brand of baseball. The Brewers get off to a pretty good start in a lot of offensive categories, which is just such a contrast to what Brewers fans are used to in years gone by anyway. And again, there's a lot of baseball left to be played this year, but so far the Brewers have had some intriguing storylines to follow.
You bet.
Talking about storylines, that brings us to the Green Bay Packers and the upcoming NFL draft. And we could talk about the Bucs, we could talk about the Brewers, but we all know what the Packers are, particularly coming off last season where they got so much from their draft. So Brian Gutekunst is playing with a hot hand off last year's draft, the draft before that, and a lot of picks this year.
I think it's so funny that we're going into the 2024 draft and you don't hear anybody saying, draft a wide receiver. I don't know how many straight years that was the big thing that had to happen and didn't really happen very often. Now it's not even a question, and it's not a quarterback really. This is now almost where, like you said, he's had such a good run, and now he can almost fine-tune the spots that he's trying to fill. It's not this huge thing that he's trying to huge a gap there and a gap there. No. It's here, maybe on the defensive backside. Always an offensive lineman or two are important. But where would you say is their most important pick when it comes to their first pick?
I think the offensive line is an area you need to address. I think there are enough questions there or enough opportunity for someone to earn playing time, whether it's this season or long-term in that area. That's one thing. Certainly the other safety position, you've signed Xavier McKinney in the offseason. I think the other safety position needs to be addressed in this draft, but I will expect a running back to be chosen. I will expect the Packers to add on the defensive line. We shall see. Any other year, it seems like going in with 5 picks in the first 100, we'd be talking about how everything hinges on this draft and how everything is going to be so important based on what they do. But you're right. You don't have that narrative because this young team last year came along so quickly and continues to kind of look like it's going to ascend. I would say, however, it seems a little bit forgotten in my mind that as of Christmas weekend last year, so late in the season, you had Devondre Campbell on social media questioning player usage and criticism. You had Jair Alexander definitely off on his own deal, and the Packers barely beating the Carolina Panthers. Now, those things all happened, and maybe they galvanized the team, and obviously you won the last 2 regular season games after that and went into the playoffs on an up note. But that deep in the season, you were still that close to really having what would be considered a substandard season. So I think the margin for error in the draft and just in the NFL in general is awfully fine.
How much will you put that type of situation onto this coaching staff to try to make sure they don't run into that again this December in 2024? Because, like you said, it was such a precarious moment. They got through it. They win a playoff game and then end up losing to the 49ers. But, like you said, it happened. How does Matt LaFleur deal? Or is this something more of a Brian Gutekunst issue?
I think the coaching staff bears watching this year, not because you should be concerned about it, just to see how it comes along. We're talking about all this positive momentum for the Green Bay Packers. There are 4 coordinators in the NFL. You have an offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, special teams coordinator, strength and conditioning coordinator. Packers fired 2 of them in the offseason. If everything was truly on the up, why you're changing half of your coordinator group, and then the defensive staff was certainly changed along with that, along with the strength and conditioning staff. So clearly the Packers, there's a little bit of a reboot or a readjust, even though they know they are back to being an NFL elite team, and they should be for some time because they have such talent at key positions.
Phase 1 of their workouts started on April 15th. All smiles when we see the video of the guys walking into the building there, but what does that do as we turn the calendar now to officially being in the 2024 offseason?
It unifies this unit, this roster, with the roles that were defined last year, or players who say, I need to create my role this year. Clearly, it's Jordan Love's football team. You know that. The offense has once again proven it can play at the highest level in the NFL. It's up to the defense to come along, and it's now an entirely new defense, or predominantly new defensive coaching staff, and I think you're going to see new players there. If you have 5 picks in the top 100, you would expect those to probably be 4 contributing players. I think that's, you can expect that safely. You go back to the New Orleans Saints, where they changed their whole team a few years ago because of what they had in terms of success in the draft. So a lot can change in Green Bay. And if I'm a player who succeeded last year, you are still on edge a little bit because you know that young talent will be coming in behind you.
Yeah, and with those 5 picks that you've referenced a couple of times here, are you looking at that predominantly on the defensive side because of the changes in the coordinator and because of some of the players that have now gone elsewhere?
I think that's going to be interesting because you would say that that's how it would slot, but if you pick an offensive lineman or maybe 2 or a running back in there, suddenly you're going to the offensive side of the ball. So, and this year's draft is supposed to be primarily offensive player dominated in terms of the early round, more offensive talent there. So it will be interesting to see what the Packers do. Here's our list of Packers needs, and you only have one offensive need written up there. So what does that mean? Another very defensive heavy draft, because the Packers have had several of those.
One of the things that we've seen, especially more recently than we did, 5-10 years ago, draft day moves by this team. A lot of times they would stand pat, just kind of stick with what they had. But now it seems Brian Gutekunst has kind of got into a rhythm of finding a spot to trade here or there, maybe get a few more lower-end picks that have turned out to work out well. Are you kind of expecting that again this year just because of the way their roster stands at this point?
I would, because what do they have on the list there? 11 picks, I think. I don't see 11 new players making this roster. Right. So you use some of that ammunition to move around a little bit, to move up in certain rounds and target a player or target a guy you think is at a position of need for you. So I would expect there to be some movement just because of where the Packers stand with this list of picks and their roster coming back from last year. They have a trip to Brazil to prepare for. It's going to be a very busy summer, a summer away from Green Bay in a lot of ways. They have a couple of preseason games on the road on this year's schedule because you play 3 preseason games now, and they're this year's slotted to have 2 on the road and 1 at home. So this is going to be a season they have to kind of kick into pretty quickly and prepare for, and that's Matt LaFleur. They've had an international trip before. It didn't go terribly well, and so that's where you look at this coaching staff as well in terms of getting this team in the right frame of mind going forward for this season.
Yeah, a big question there for you. When this team does have to prepare for the trip to Brazil, how important is the procedure of going to those preseason games on the road to get these guys acclimated? Because it's not an easy trip. It's not like it's flying from here to Florida. I mean, it's much further. And again, you're going to a different country and continent, which adds to the mix in that situation.
If you're a football coach, I mean, I don't want to speak solely for Matt LaFleur, but let's pick any football coach. What do you despise more than anything else? The unknown. for goodness sakes. And there's so much unknown about trying to travel to Brazil. As you said, it doesn't compare to any other trip. It doesn't compare to London, which was in the season last time around. Now you have this long international trip. Young players who haven't traveled much at all. We don't know who the preseason opponents are yet on the road. If it's Indianapolis and Cleveland, well, those are short trips. If you're going to California and Buffalo, those are different situations. So it will be interesting to see how this all comes together for Green Bay, because the eyes are going to be on this football team much differently this year than they were last.
Yeah, they will have to try to handle the expectations, something they didn't have last year, but they did handle themselves well. I can't wait for this draft to see how it unfolds and what this team is going to look like once they start having their mini camps, et cetera, moving towards training camp.
That's a perfect jumping off point for us here, because we like what we do. Brandon Cruz, Tim Van Vooren, Lily's out. Fox 6 commitment to being at these events. The Bucks, the Brewers, the Packers take it right on through. We can talk about it being this overlap season. We have the opportunity to talk about it. We do it every Sunday night on the Fox 6 Sports Blitz. We're doing it here on First and North. And it's such an interesting time, because with all the changes in the industry, our industry, and all the changes in what people can follow in their own personal lives, sports is still pretty big in this market.
It's huge, and it's something that brings everyone together. Even people who aren't the biggest sports fans will talk about the Packers, or talk about Giannis and the Bucks, or even the Brewers, especially around this time of year when the season's just getting started. And then you have the other sports, like the Wave and the Admirals going into the playoffs and trying to do things. So I do think sports in this community is a huge deal. In fact, we were just talking about how the WNBA wants to expand. I would think Milwaukee would be a great market to try to bring in one of those franchises, because of how important sports is to this community.
Yep, no doubt about it. We appreciate you taking a ride with us today at the Fox 6 First and North Wisconsin edition. We'll be back on this platform. Of course, we're back many times throughout the day on Fox 6 over the air. Take care. Appreciate your company.